All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome everyone to our training session on accessible complex images. My name is Tyler Winters. I'm an accessibility specialist here at MSFW Consulting. Also with me today is accessibility specialist Melissa Rominato, and we're going to go ahead and take turns leading the presentation today. Um, Today we're going to dive deeper into image and alternate text so we can practice deciding which images need alt text and what alt text is appropriate. But before we get to all that, a few housekeeping items to make you aware of. These sessions are being recorded. They will be made available for you to view at a later date. And if you haven't done so already, please mute your mics to avoid any unnecessary distractions during the training. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to type those in the chat and we'll answer those as soon as we can. Okay, so when we talk about adding alternate text to images, the first step is to always determine what the purpose of that image is, because not all images actually need alt text. And that's where this simple decision tree can help guide us. You can see on the left, we start by asking, what is the purpose of this image? And from there, we kind of branch off into two main categories. Is the image decorative or is the image meaningful? So we can break these down. So if the image is purely decorative, meaning it doesn't add any essential content or any meaning to the document, you want to think of things like any type of design elements like background images, borders, little flourishes. If that's the case, then we need to make sure assistive technologies skip over those images. So in Microsoft Word, we would mark these images as decorative in the alt text settings. In Adobe Acrobat, these images would just be artifacted. And both of these types of actions remove the images from the reading order so that screen readers can ignore them. They'll just skip over them. Now, on the other hand, if the image is meaningful, meaning it does convey important information that contributes or adds to the content, then we need to give that image alternate text. And as you know, alt text should provide a concise, clear description of what the image conveys so that users who are relying on screen readers can get the same information as a sighted user would. So for example, if you had a picture of a graph, you wouldn't want to use alt text that reads an image of a graph. Even though it is an image of a graph, that doesn't tell the user anything meaningful about the image. It states that there is a graph, but it doesn't explain the details of what that graph might be showing, which essentially just makes it useless for someone relying on a screen reader. So in a case like this, good alt text for an image of a graph would be something like a bar graph comparing monthly website traffic for two different web pages. Web page 1 has the highest traffic at 10,000 visits, while web page 2 has the lowest at 2,000 visits. A description like that is clear, it's to the point, and it provides the same key insights any sighted user would get from the graph. And it also just ensures the user will grasp the most important information without needing to actually see the image. So to sum this slide up, if an image is purely decorative, we want to make sure it's hidden from assistive technology. If it's meaningful, then we need to provide alt text that conveys its purpose. And when writing that alt text, we just want to make sure that it actually provides value rather than just describing the existence of the image, because the main goal here is to ensure that users who are relying on assistive technology get that full experience of the content just like a sighted user would. Okay, so now when we talk about accessible images, the key question is, how do we ensure that everyone, regardless of how they access the content, gets the same information? And this is where alt text really comes into play. At its core, Alt text is simply a text-based representation of the information contained in an image. It serves as a way to convey the purpose or meaning of an image to people who cannot see it. Whether they're using a screen reader, whether they have images disabled or are experiencing any technical issues. Alt text can be beneficial when it comes to that. So based on the definition of alt text, it sounds easy, but sometimes coming up with the right alt text can be challenging. I'm sure you guys have run into this. So a good way to think about alt text is, how would you describe the image if you were explaining it to someone over the phone? You wouldn't just say it's a chart or it's a picture, because that doesn't provide any real value to the person you're telling. So instead, you'd want to describe what the image is actually communicating, whether that's trends in a graph, whether that's relationships between data points, or any key visual concepts in that image. And really, like I said earlier, the goal of alt text is to provide the same understanding that a sighted user would get just by looking at the same image. So it doesn't need to be, your alt text doesn't need to be overly detailed, but it should be clear. Again, it should be concise and relevant to the context in which the image is appearing. So as we continue, we're going to dive deeper into best practices for writing alt text and practice making meaningful descriptions that truly convey the image's purpose. So now that we know why alt text is important, let's talk about ways in which we can write it effectively. And just like with anything we write, there are some best practices to follow to make sure the alt text is clear, useful, and accessible. So first, I've said it quite a few times already. First, you want to be concise. Alt text should provide just enough detail to convey the image's meaning without any unnecessary words. So a good rule of thumb in most cases is to keep it under a sentence or two in most cases, but since we're talking about complex images, this is where that exception to the rule applies. So most likely when it comes to complex images, you'll more than likely need to provide longer descriptions. But next, you'll want to make sure to use standard punctuation and spacing. This may seem like a small thing, but screen readers actually rely on proper punctuation to help users understand the content. So a missing period or an extra space might not seem like a big deal visually for a sighted user, but for someone listening to the content, it can make a huge difference in comprehension. You'll also want to make sure to check your spelling. Again, just like standard punctuation and spacing, this helps ensure that the information is clear when read aloud by a screen reader. So any typos or misspellings can and will make the alt text confusing or misleading. Also, one common mistake you want to make sure to avoid is including the words image, the word photo, logo, or picture in the alt text. We want to avoid this because screen readers already announced that it's an image, so there's no need to repeat it. So for example, instead of saying a logo for the Department of Public Innovation, just use the text Department of Public Innovation, because a JAWS screen reader is going to read that as Department of Public Innovation graphic. So adding the word logo or picture to the alt text just kind of makes that announcement redundant. And again, we want to be concise. We want to kind of get to the point right away. Lastly, if the exact same content presented in the image is already available in the surrounding text. So for example, if a chart's data is already fully explained like in a surrounding paragraph or included in a properly formatted table, then the image can just be considered decorative. In these cases, it's better to just kind of mark it as decorative in Word or artifacted in Acrobat so screen readers can skip over it rather than repeating the same information. Okay, so now that we've covered the best practices for writing alt text, let's go ahead and put some of those principles into action by reviewing these three images on this screen. So each of these images require a different approach when it comes to alt text, and we're going to go ahead and talk about those. So in the first image, um, we can see that it is a view of the Iowa State Capitol, maybe. It's got some surrounding buildings. We got to see some fields and whatnot. Um, when determining the alt text for this image, we can see that it's not trying to add any content, right? So this image can just be, it's mainly just for visual appeal. In this case, like I said, it doesn't provide any essential content. It's just a representation of Iowa. So since this information doesn't add any meaningful information or value, we just want to mark this one as decorative in Microsoft Word. Or if we're remediating in Adobe Acrobat, we'll want to artifact that. So this just ensures that screen reader users don't waste time listening to unnecessary descriptions that don't enhance their understanding of the content. So next up is the second image. We can see that this one's a logo. It features the word Iowa. It's in a stylized font. There's a path and a sunset in the letter O. For this image, since this logo actually contains text, our alt text should include the exact same words that appear in the image. So for this example, the alt text for this logo would just simply be Iowa. We don't need to, in this case, we don't need to describe that there is a sunset or that there is a road or path in the O, because it doesn't add any specific meaning relevant to the context. And then finally, the last image, it's an image of a graph chart. This graph looks to presenting some data on the percentage of goals reached over the last 2 years. So when writing alt text for a graph like this one, we just kind of need to go beyond simply saying a graph of goal percentages reached. Instead, we should summarize the key trends and relationships shown in this images, or in the data within this image. So for example, alt text might be something like percentage of goals reached, and then I might continue on and say goal 1, prior year equals 25%, current year equals 70%. And then I might also add goal 2, prior year equals 100%, current year equals 99%, and so on. So in this case, this description would help screen reader users understand the relationships in this chart, rather than just being told that a graph exists. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Melissa, and she's going to dive into some more examples.
Thanks, Tyler. Let me share my screen. Try to share my screen. Hang on one second here. I'm having a little bit of trouble. Screen share. Right, I might not be able to share my screen. I'm not sure why, but the share button is not working on my screen.
Melissa, do you want me to just go ahead and share, and you can...
Yeah, perhaps that would be the best.
Yeah.
I tell you what, let me jump out real quick and back in and just see if that changes, and we'll try that
Yep.
real quick first. Okay.
Okay.
All right, let me try that. There we go. Okay. I'm not sure why, but All right, so hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yep.
And we are going to start with an image that is more complicated than some of the images that we've looked at in the past. All of these images today are going to be different than those ones we used in the word training and that we used carried through to Acrobat, for example. So let's talk about this image, and we're going to talk about its purpose and what appropriate alternate text would be. So we have kind of this flow chart, right? And decision tree hierarchy. You can describe it lots of different ways, but it's important that someone who is cannot see the image is getting the exact same information. And it's going to require more than us just having the words mission, vision, strategic initiative, goal, etc. We have to have some more details. So I'm going to open that in a PDF document because that's probably, well, in some cases, you might have pasted this image into a Word document, for example, but sometimes you'll be working with it in Acrobat, and it's also a good reminder of the different ways that we can add alternate text to images when we are in Acrobat. So if I run my checker, you'll notice that I've got no alt text for this image, not too big of a surprise there. And there are a few different ways I can add alternate text to the image. So for example, I can go to accessibility, I can choose set alternate text, and it's going to give me kind of this little text box that I can type into and save my alternate text there. I can also go to my figure itself in the tags tree. I can right click and in properties, write my alternate text for my image here. This one might be slightly larger box, so I think I'm going to stick with that one right now. You can also write your alternate text in another program like Word, for example, where it's larger and you can see more at once, and then just copy and paste the the text box, whether it's here or in set alternate text or wherever in Acrobat. Okay, so let's get started on this one. And again, I'm going to think back to how I might describe this image to someone who I am talking to over the phone, right? Someone who is on their way somewhere, they're calling me from a car, they can't look at their computer, and they want to know what information is in this chart. So I'm going to start by saying that it's a hierarchical chart with mission slash vision at the top level. So I can see visually that it's kind of, I've got these, if I drew horizontal lines across here, I would have these levels of the chart, and those levels help us understand the relationships between the pieces of content. So I want to let them know that it's hierarchical. I want to let them know that that we're starting at the top of that chart. And maybe, you could put flow chart. I'm not exactly sure, to be honest, what this is. It's the strategic planning structure, I guess, but someone with a little more closer knowledge of the topic might change that slightly. So at already have level. Okay. So next, I'm going to say that there are two instances of strategic initiative, and those are at the second level. So I'm going down. So I've kind of built out those first two layers of my structure here. But I also have a little kind of call out comment here, right, that points to strategic initiative. And so I need to include that information. So I'm going to type the text exactly as it appears on the screen. Okay, there is no set amount of strategic initiatives you need to have. So I'm going to include that information there kind of while I'm on that second level. It's information that's relative to that level. All right, next I need to move down to the next level, and that's where my goals are. So I'm going to say that, under each strategic initiative, um, are two goals at the third level. And maybe I don't even need that. I'm going to change this a little bit and just say each strategic initiative has two goals at the third level. That way, I'm not repeating that level information. It's clear it's only at the end of my phrase and not in multiple places. All right, so moving down to the next level, each goal has two KPIs at the fourth level. So I'm kind of just moving down one. And then there's again some extra call out information here about those KPIs. So let me add that information, select a. All right, and I'm using the exact same, you'll notice words and abbreviations that appear in the image. It doesn't spell out KPI. It uses FY instead of typing fiscal year. I'm just matching what's on the screen. If you are a person who has, knowledge of this content and thinks it's important, you could always type that out the first time. So maybe the first times we say KPI, you could in parentheses spell that out and then just use KPI through the rest. If that's something that the user needs spelled out and extra information on. Usually, we kind of need to think of these images in context, like this is probably part of a larger report or document, and it might have, some information about what a strategic initiative is, what a goal is, what a KPI is, etc. All right, moving down. So each set of goals has each set of two goals. So there are two goals together, and those two goals together have three action steps at the fifth level. All right, so if I scroll back up here, this is one of the reasons it's not so great to type this in the screens that they give us here on in Acrobat, just because there's not a lot of space. The other thing to be very careful of is, say that you're typing alternate text, and I'm going to copy this so I don't lose it, and maybe you get an email or something, you switch over, your attention goes elsewhere. Sometimes this window disappears or clears out. So, so if you have longer alternate text, it really is the safest to type that somewhere else and copy and paste it in. And if you have alternate text on an image that you use multiple times, for example, maybe with your job, whatever that is, you use this planning structure diagram or flow chart or whatever it's called multiple times in different documents and different scenarios. And one thing that you might want to do is you might want to save this alternate text out into a document. And that way you can just grab it and reuse it. Or maybe you're one of multiple people in your department that uses this image, and you want to make sure you're consistent across across your department so that you're giving people the same alternate text for the same image, regardless of who's doing it and where. So in that case, I would really recommend that you save your alternate text and you have, maybe a shared document that folks can go and grab it from. And that can be especially helpful in something like maybe a organizational chart. So maybe you have an annual report that includes an organizational chart, and you put that out, or maybe it's a quarterly report, you do it a few times a year, and you don't want to have to recreate that alt text from the beginning. Maybe you've got a multi-level structure, you've typed it all out, and yeah, you'll have to check it maybe since last time a person's name changed or something like that needs to be updated. But do yourself a favor, and for those commonly used images, especially things like these flowcharts or diagrams, get your alt text written, save it somewhere, and reuse it. Be consistent, and don't reinvent the wheel each time you have an image like this. All right, I'm going to close. I'm going to save. And, again, I'm always slightly paranoid. Sometimes I like to go and double check and make sure it's still there. Another thing I can do is run my checker, and you'll see that I now have the alternate text added to that image. Any questions about this one before we move on to our next example? All right, our next example is a little different. So we've just got kind of the beginning or one page of a how-to document. And so this is a document that tells a user how to submit a claim in Iowa grants. So it's got some words, and then it has some screenshots with some portions of the page, circled here. And again, if I run the checker, everything's done except for I've got to deal with the alternate text for these images. And in this case, I'm going to zoom in kind of closely on this first one so we can see what we're dealing with. So we've got in this document kind of our heading, right? It lets us know what this document is. And then we've got an ordered list that has some steps. So the first step is to log into Iowa Grants, and it gives the URL to where we're going to do that. And then the second step says to click on the grants component on the left-hand side of the screen. And then it's got a screenshot that just kind of highlights that and shows you, gives you kind of visual confirmation of where you're told to go in that text in step 2. And similarly for step 3, it tells us to find the one we're looking for or use the search bar and then click on it once we find it. And again, it's just got the Iowa Grants screenshot. It shows us in, kind of our search results here, and that we can find the number and then click on that line to go to the next screen. So in both of these cases, these images are kind of a visual confirmation of what it's telling us in the steps. There's no real extra information in the images. It's just for folks who are sighted, it gives them a visual confirmation. Oh yeah, mine does look like that. Great, I will do the same thing. I'm in the right place, right? In a document like this, those images are actually going to be considered decorative. And that's because the steps of what we actually need to do are all written out in text in our ordered list. And the screenshots, again, are just decorative visual confirmation. So in this case, I can mark both of those images as decorative. And we've got a couple different ways to do that, if you'll remember from our Acrobat training. But I'm going to use the way that is kind of the cleanest or safest. And that is to go into my tags tree to find, they're in the second and third list item inside my list here. I can find both of those figures, select them, and I'm just going to hold down my control key and left click in order to select 2 at a time, just to save myself a little extra step here. And then I will right click and choose change tag to artifact. I'll just say, okay, leave everything as is. Now those images are gone and I'm left with empty figure tags, which I can just delete and save. So now in the tags tree, in the part that gets conveyed to assistive technology, they're going to hear the headings. They're going to hear that I have a list of 3 items. They're going to hear that text for item 1, for item 2, and item 3. And they won't hear, screenshot of grants page or, whatever. That doesn't really give them any extra information. They already know where they're supposed to be from the words. So it just cuts down on the auditory input and information that a screen reader user has to filter through. And it's good practice regardless. If you're creating a document like this, anything that is on the screen should be in the text anyway, right? A lot of times these screenshots are kind of small. It's hard. You zoom in, they might get kind of blurry when you zoom in. So for all users, it makes the most sense to include everything that's important and relevant in the text, so that we don't have to rely only on the screenshots. Because again, maybe they zoom in and they can't read it. Maybe they're looking at this on a phone, and it's those screenshots are not usable in that regard. All right. So we've got a few more examples. Let's take a look at the next one. And all right, so the next example is an infographic. So in this case, I'm going to zoom in here so we can see a little better. So in this case, we have some words along with some images, but they're kind of stylized. They're kind of fancy. They've got some colors. They've got some kind of icons that go along with them. They've got some bolded text. It's in this certain look, right? And we use these a lot in things like reports or flyers and brochures. And they're a little trickier because they contain both images of text as well as actual images in the infographics, right? Because the whole thing is an image. So we've got images of text, and then we have kind of these extra graphics. So when we're writing alternate text for an infographic, we want to make sure that just like when we have any images that contain text, that our alt text exactly matches the images in the text. So again, and I think this time maybe let me see if I can just bring up let's do this one in Word. It's going to be a little bit longer, and I want to have a little bit of a better, an easier way for me to kind of see that. So let me get a little space here where we can type and look at the same time and make our lives a little bit easier. So, okay, so let's get started on this infographic. We are going to, again, we want the exact content that appears in the image. So I've got the 15.2% of Iowans reported for mental health. Yes, great to date. So one thing I want to note is we've got a couple other things going on here. So I do have an asterisk after the mental health. I'm going to go ahead and include that in my alternate text. Assuming this is in part of a normal report, maybe there's an asterisk down below this image that explains what the asterisk means, or, maybe it's to a definition or something like that. I put that in the wrong place. So I do need to include it because I do see it there visually on the screen. So I want to include that asterisk. And screen reader users are used to hearing symbols and will not be surprised at all when they hear JAWS usually says star for an asterisk. And then they'll hear that down below and get the definition or whatever extra information is provided. The other thing is I have kind of a map here of the outline of the state of Iowa, which is nice. It looks pretty. But each of my phrases here include that we're talking about Iowans, so we don't really need to do anything special with that. It's just kind of a nice visual that goes along with it. So let's type our alt text for the second one here. 19.2% of Iowans reported they have ever been diagnosed with a depressant. Okay, and again, I've got a asterisk there. I just realized I'm putting periods, but I don't necessarily need to. I made a typo here. One nice thing about doing this in Word, for example, is that it's going to find those kind of simple typos and help me fix those, which is nice. We don't have that feature in Acrobat. Word alt text does do some spell checking in the alt text pane, if you're typing it in Word, but Acrobat does not. So that's another reason when you have kind of text heavy alt text, another good reason to type it in Word and do your spell check there before you copy and paste. All right. So this is all one image, but it's kind of separated into these two different sections. So I'm going to go ahead and type in my next kind of heading here. And just to kind of connect these phrases that come afterwards with this heading, I'm going to use a colon afterwards. And that just kind of connects it and makes it clear that this heading, which of course isn't really a heading because it's part of an image, so it can't be an image and a heading at the same time, but we're going to make sure that's kind of connected to the text that comes after it. And then again, I've got kind of little images for each one, little icons. The first one, is kind of showing some happy looking people kind of dancing. I've got people lined up. I've got a person using a wheelchair. So those are nice, but again, they're just kind of extra visual interest. And the words themselves are giving me the real meaning of this infographic. Again, I've got another asterisk and some reference, it looks like there. I'm going to separate these. I can do that with periods. I can do them with commas. Whatever seems to make the most sense for the content. I'm going to use periods, I think, here just because they seem a little less of a serial list of things and maybe kind of stand a little more on their own. Right. And you'll notice I'm just using the capitalization that they use, and I kind of did that on our flow chart or diagram before, right? They had strategic initiative, the word was capitalized. The goal, the word was capitalized. So I'm just kind of matching what I see here on the screen. The one thing that I probably do want to avoid is doing all caps, or at least the whole thing in all caps. Just because, again, it's just like an email or something like that. It's kind of yelly to do that. It's fine to do that for acronyms or even to emphasize something, but overall, I'm gonna kind of use my normal conventions. For some reason, I can't type Iowans, but that's okay because words got me there. And I think I have everything in there. So a little hard to see because I'm scrolling here, but I've got all my content. So I'm just gonna take that, I'm gonna copy it, and I'm gonna switch over to my document. And I can, again, get at it a couple different ways here. I can right click and choose show in tags panel. That's going to take me right to that first figure. If I go into properties, I can paste. A little hard to see, but it is all there. And hit close, save. I remember my checker. I got that one. And now I know I need to move on to the next one. All right, so let's talk about this one. This one is a chart, and we've seen a chart before, not too new or exciting, right? But if you look a little closer, you'll notice that this chart is different than the ones we've seen before. And it's different because our data points are not labeled on this chart, which makes it really hard. I have to kind of guess at what those amounts are between year one and year two for a certain month. So obviously, if you're the one creating the chart, and we went over this in a different training, we want to make sure we have our data points there, especially on a chart like this, where we have a lot of room. There aren't a ton of data points, so it would be very easy to add those data points to this chart. But we didn't create this chart, someone else did. We just have to make this document accessible so we can post it. So we have to figure out what to do with the chart for alternate text. So I'm going to bring up my Word document again here, and I'm going to start doing a little bit of writing. And the first thing I'm going to do, since the well, I'm going to call it the heading, the chart's label here, the heading text comes as part of the image itself. I'm going to make sure that I include that in the alternate text. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the words approximate values in here. And that is just to let the screen reader user know, hey, those dot points aren't on here. These are not going to be exact values. The I'm going to take a guess at what each of these are just based on eyeballing it, but they're not exact. They're going to be rounded or approximate values. So I know that visually because I can see that there are no values there, but we're going to give the screen reader user the same information by using those words approximate values. So then I'm just going to do my table kind of like I normally would. I've got April, I've got a year one value, and I'm going to have a year two value as well. And here I'm just saving myself a little bit of typing, which is another thing that makes it pretty easy to do in Word versus, when you've got a little more space. If you've got another screen, you might have this up on your other screen, and Word even kind of gets pretty smart about guessing what you're trying to do there and does some predictive stuff that might save you some typing as well. Okay, so I got kind of my structure set up here, and now I need to fill in these values. So for April year one, that's my blue section here. I'm going to say that that's 350. It's not exactly right, but it's pretty close. And then my year two starts at about 350 and goes up here to, I'm going to say 775. It might be more like 780. I'm not 100% sure. But if I do the math, then I get 425 for that year two value. And I can just keep going through my chart here and estimating those values. And it's pretty doable for a chart this size. It's not giant. I only have, 12 or so data points on this chart. So I can kind of make the decision, yeah, I can do these estimated values. It's not going to take me too long, and I can get through it here, right? Last few in. But sometimes you might have a similar chart that doesn't have data value labels that is much larger. Maybe instead of having 12 data points, it has, 60 data points, for example, or even more. And in that case, it might be impossible to visually kind of discern an approximate value for each of those data points. And when that happens, you might want to talk about the trends instead, right? So you can imagine if this were for 2 years or I'm sorry, we've got 2 years of data now. If we had 10 years of data, then it might be really difficult to get all those data points. So I might have to say something like, in year one, in April of year one, newsletter signups were at approximate over 300 or 350, and then dropped in May, rose again in June, and then trended downward through July and August, and then rose again in September to about, this much. So it might be a lot more of a trend. And again, when you don't have those data points and you can't guesstimate them because it's too hard visually to tell, or because there are too many data points, then again, think of what you'd say to someone over the phone, and use those kind of trends as your alternate text. We've even seen charts in things that we've been asked to remediate where there's an axis that's completely unlabeled. So for example, a chart where not only are there no data points, but like these whole y-axis labels weren't present. And again, in that case, we have no idea what would be over those, or in those, what those axes labels are. And in that case, we again would just talk about the trends instead of any kind of data points. And you might use words like trended downward or upward, because we don't know what those upper and lower data limits are. All right, so for this one, I'm going to again copy and paste into my document here. I'm going to find the second image, go to properties, copy and paste it in, scroll. I'm just going to make sure it's all there. My important approximate values words are there, and I'm going to save. All right, I have one more complex image here. And this one is the Iowa DOC district map. So this one has a whole bunch of information, and that information includes, when I'm looking at it here, includes the state of Iowa map with each county kind of delineated or coded. It has color coded here. It's got a location, it looks like, for each district's headquarters here. So I'm looking at this top left one. I've got the 3rd district. It looks like it's a specific point on the map. And then some of the districts also have locations for correctional facilities in them. So I've got kind of various layers of information here that I need to include to really give the full and complete picture of the map. I'm going to zoom out a little bit just so I can see a little more on my screen at once. Let me get that Word document back up. And so I'm going to start with my first district. I'm going to kind of go in order here. And, the first district covers, and it's got a huge list of counties here. So I'm gonna write that list of counties. And this is a little bit similar to one we looked at in our data visualizations training. So it's kind of similar, but it's got, I think, even an extra layer here of labels and information that is represented in the map that we need to convey to the users via alt text. Sometimes words look weird, but they actually are spelled correctly. Okay, I think I got the last one here. So I've got all my counties listed. I spelled Delaware wrong. I'm going to fix that. Counties. And in this case, the only information is the kind of the headquarters of that district. You can see in the little red pinpoint on the map. So I am going to include and is headquartered in, and I think this case that's actually in Waterloo, Iowa. Again, depending on your the availability of the actual data. I had to actually go look this up to know that's Waterloo, where the first district headquarters is. But some data was used to generate this map, or maybe if you don't know, and someone asked you to post this information, you might have to go back to them and say, hey, there's no alternate text. First of all, can you add it? And if no one can if there's no one to ask for that, then you might just say, hey, send an email. Where is this? Where is District 1? Where is each headquarters, so that you can have that information. And I'm just seeing, sorry, that there's a question here in the chat. Are roadmaps considered an image? How does one summarize alt text for a map with many data layers, or how are maps handled in general? And we've kind of talked about this a couple different times with different scenarios in our office hours, as well as in our data visualizations session. But yeah, roadmaps are often added to documents as images. And there are a couple different options there. So a lot of times, if those maps are usually created using a whole bunch of data points, and sometimes the easiest thing is to point the user to the raw data. So in some cases, if you've got a document or a web page, you might be able to provide a link that goes to the actual data in tabular format, for example, where people can actually go to the data tables that have interest to them. They can go to the specific column or row and find those data points. Another option is to write alternate text that, again, describes what you're seeing. It kind of depends on the complexity of the map. It sounds like here we're talking about ones with lots of layers. So in the case of many layers, many data points, I would recommend either linking to the data or including the data on the web page or in the document itself. A lot of times, all users might want to view that information as data, not just screen reader users. The map might give them kind of an overall picture of the information, but if it has that many data points and they're really just wanting to get to that data, then providing the data itself, usually in tabular format, is the preferred way to handle it. In that case, the alternate text for the map, if we've got the map image itself, if we've got a link to or the actual data, then the alternate text for the map is often just a name or label for the map. And, and either if that content is right there on the page, you don't really have to do more than that, or you might want to mention, link below to the full data set. Okay, so I think I got my first district in here. In the interest of time, I'm going to do some copying and pasting here. Let me find one. I'm just going to go with District 2 here. I'm going to copy and paste. So here, let's just look at this real quick. I've got District 2. Where is that? It is right here. It's kind of in the top center, this gray or tan area. So it lists the counties just like we did before. It tells where it's headquartered. In this case, I think it's Ames. And then we've got 2 correctional facilities that are located in the district. And so we've just added Fort Dodge Correctional Facility in Fort Dodge, Iowa, and North Central Correctional Facility in Rockwell City, Iowa, are in the 2nd district. So just that extra information there for those ones that have the locations. So I'm just going to copy, actually, I've got the whole thing. So I'm going to copy on my other screen here the entire alt text so we can be complete. I'm going to, again, just add that to my document. The adding the alt text is going to kind of be the same process. It's just writing it and getting it in. Again, if you write it in Word, you can get some spell checking that is not available in Acrobat. And you can also save commonly used alt text in a document that then can be shared and worked on together, reused in the future, updated as needed. All right, I should have a clean checker here now that I've got it all in. Any questions about really anything we've covered today? We've got about 4 minutes left where we could answer some of those. You can type in the chat, you can feel free to raise your hand and we can call on you. Sometimes typing it all out can be a little hard. All right, just as a reminder, we will be repeating this session later on in the month. That's going to take place on October 23rd. We also are still doing our weekly office hours. Those are on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. So we've got one tomorrow, and we'll be going through pretty close to the end of the year with those every week. The last date is going to be December 10th. So we hope to see you at those office hours. Feel free to, bring your questions, share your documents so we can look at them together, give you some feedback and some help. And we hope to see you guys tomorrow. Thanks. Have a good day.